Here we go.
Yes.
Okay, so Bhante Sangharakshita, here we are on the 50th anniversary, I think to the day, actually. I think to the day when
Yes.
you did the first ordinations.
Could be, yes. I think you're right. Yes.
I think actually getting this lot together in here as was maybe more organisation than the ordinations 50 years ago, actually. Yes.
But now there's many more people.
Yeah, there's many more people. So we've just watched the first of the history films. We just watched the first of the history films that Surya Prabha made many years ago.
Oh, yes.
So we've got a bit of a sense of
Right.
what you kick-started 50
Yes.
years ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
So give us, your life looked very unusual and exciting then, but give us a sense of your life right now, just for the people in this room that don't really, don't have much contact with you.
Well, to begin with, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah? Oh, that's good. Well, now, my life today is a rather different life that I'm living today than I've lived before, in the sense that it's a more restricted life. There are things I can't do that I've been accustomed to do, especially physical things. I'm afraid I do need a lot of looking after. There's a lot of things I can't do for myself. And that begins with getting up in the morning. I need a bit of help, getting up. I need a bit of help dressing, etc., etc. So I'm not as independent, as I used to be. You might be interested to know, well, what I do after getting up. Well, first thing, apart from the usual things, of course, there's breakfast. I've always been fond of my breakfast. And after breakfast, I usually see my secretary, who at present is Sthana Shraddha. And he reads me the mail. First of all, it's email, and then it's post. I hear the email, hear the post, and I sometimes reply, though not always, depending on the kind of communication. So that takes me up to 11 o'clock. And then usually, of course, nowadays, Sangharakshita comes along, and sometimes I do my exercises under his guidance. Exercises that were taught to me last year after I came out of hospital, taught me by the physiotherapist from the hospital. And of course it's quite important I keep up my mobility. I can still walk a little, but I want to keep that little. After that I start seeing people. This morning I've seen 2 people, each for half an hour, and then of course there comes lunch. It isn't very exciting, is it? And after lunch I have another sleep, and I guess that's even less exciting. And after that sleep I get up, and I'm not quite sure I do after that. It varies a bit. Sometimes I listen to the radio, sometimes I listen to a talking book, and then at 6 o'clock there comes dinner. Again, a bit monotonous, isn't it? But there's something a little more interesting to come. When I feel like it, after dinner, I dictate. I dictate one of the papers that I've been producing recently. And this last one is, of course, Passage to America, which actually contains quite a bit more than details of my first visit in, I think, 1969 to the United States. So that's a quite intensive period. And sometimes it's Paramasa who takes the dictation, and sometimes it's Suvajra. And between the three of us, we eventually produce something which Mahamati arranges to be put online. After that, I have what I call my quiet period. Some people would call it just sitting, but I like to call it my quiet period until it's time to go to bed. And of course, once again, I can't do it all myself. I need help of various kinds. But I'm glad to say that after getting to bed, I do sleep nowadays. And that's a very great blessing. If for quite a while I was not sleeping at all well, but that's all past history at the moment. I have a good sleep and I'm ready for the next day.
Thank you.
So perhaps I need not say really more than that.
No, thank you, Bhante.
That's my day nowadays.
And you're happy?
And I'm happy, yes. I'm especially happy when I can meet people. And of course I do meet people from all over the order, all over the movement, all over the world. And I really do enjoy those encounters, which are sometimes very, very interesting, because the people usually, in one way or another, are very interesting people. Some of them, following really interesting occupations. The other day I had a lady visit me and I asked her what she did. She said, "Oh, I'm a gemologist." A gemologist? So I said, "Yes, a gemologist." And then I pointed to my table and I had some gems there. So we had something in common to talk about. And that usually happens. Yeah. Anyway, proceed.
Proceed. Okay, I will. So on the on the film that we've just seen, Bhante, there's this moment where you realise you're going to have to start a new Buddhist movement you've been sacked from the Buddhist Society or whatever it was, and you realise that, do you know what this means? You're going to start a new Buddhist society, a new Buddhist movement. Do you remember that moment?
I remember that moment very well.
Yeah.
And I was in India.
Oh.
And I had received a letter from the English Sangha Trust, who had originally invited me to England, saying that, so far as they were concerned, I was no longer welcome. So I said to my friend Terry, who was with me in India, "Do you know what this means?" He said, "No." I said, "It means a new Buddhist movement." That was the moment. Yeah.
Do you remember how you felt when you had that thought?
Relieved.
Relieved.
I could go my own way at last.
Yes, well, we've been struggling with that ever since, Bhante. So you could go your own way. You were just like the creative, stepping into a whole new arena sort of thing.
Yes, because previously even I had seen that a new Buddhist movement was needed, but it wasn't very easy just to break away. But I was given an excuse, one might say, for breaking away.
Breaking away.
So I welcomed it. Yep.
Yeah, you saw it as an opportunity. Fantastic.
Yes.
So you founded the Triratna Buddhist movement in
No.
Oh. What happened next, Bante?
FWBO.
Oh, right then, the FWO.
Yes. And of course it started with the ordination of 12 people.
Yes.
These were not entirely new people. I think most, if not all of them, had been attending my classes and lectures previously at the Hampstead Buddhist Vihara and at the Buddhist Society's premises. So they were people who had been known to me, or to whom I had been known for quite a long time.
And when you thought about setting up a new Buddhist movement, had you always thought ordination would play a part in that?
I don't think I thought of ordination as such, as playing a part of it, but that going for refuge would be the essential part of it.
Yes.
And of course, later I saw going for refuge as being concretely being ordained. Yeah.
So can you describe something of the event, those early ordinations? Like, for instance, on the movie, Marichi was talking about eating sandwiches at some point in the classes, and she said, I think Bante made the sandwiches. I'm just wondering, were you doing everything at that time?
I can't remember making sandwiches, but I certainly remember making the tea.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true. That's not a myth.
So you were making the tea, getting people to arrive, and then you were conducting the ordinations?
Not quite like that. Because as you know, there's the private ordination and there's the public ordination.
True.
The private ordinations were conducted at the Sakura basement, which was in our centre in a way.
Yeah.
So these were conducted in the evening at, I think, 1 or 2 or 3 order members at a time, one after the other, in the basement. And then the following weekend came the public ordinations, and they were held at Centre House, where I'd been giving lectures since my return. So the photograph or the whatever that shows the ordinees just after the public ordinations at Centre House.
In what way did the ordinations that you began to give these Western people, in what way did that reflect on your own ordination? Was there a connection between the two?
Well, my own ordination, whether as a Samanera or as a bhikkhu, did involve, of course, going for refuge. So by that time, it did not seem to be the custom or the tradition to stress that. Of course, later on, I did stress it very much and make it, that is to say, going for refuge, an essential part of the ordination. But I can't remember that was spelled out to me at the time of my own ordinations in India.
And what made you want to put an order, this thing called an order, in the centre of the Buddhist movement that you were creating?
I didn't want a society. So to my mind, an order represented commitment. And also in the case of the Buddhist Society, they did very useful work, for many years. They just had a very general sort of membership. You didn't have to be a Buddhist to join. So there was no question of being committed or even really seriously interested in Buddhism. So I thought, we don't want another society. We want an order. An order was my name for that.
So over the next few years, or even over the last 50 years, has anything changed or developed in the way that you view ordination or view the order? Or has anything stayed the same?
Well, there have been a few changes, a few adaptations. One of them, took place in India when I realized that it was important just to have one clear-cut ordination, not different degrees of ordination, which is what I'd had up till then for one reason or another. And I decided, therefore, we wouldn't anymore call ourselves upasikas and upasikas, but dharmacharis and dharmacharinis. And that word, of course, which means dharmafera, as you know, comes from the Dhammapada. I wanted to consolidate, as it were, so that there was very definitely a basic single ordination, which was for all.
So in our movement, we just have one ordination and we don't have a hierarchy or a lineage of ordinations.
You certainly have a lineage because the private and public ordinations hand on, so to speak, and continue, and the process of going for refuge.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
But the lineage, of course, of Triratna is a lot more than that. It's all our teachings, practices, friendships, everything, which we hand on. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a few questions about these seminars that you started leading in those early days. So in December 1973, which was 5 years after the first ordinations, you ran this seminar on the Bodhicharyavatara. I think you'd already run a seminar possibly on the Udana. And I'm interested to know, what was it about the form of having a group of people around you that really lent something to the way you were teaching? I wondered if there was something in particular about that form that you enjoyed or appreciated.
I think I've always enjoyed explaining. I think that's one of my characteristics, as it were. So I enjoy not just reading a text, but just sharing my understanding of it with other people. And of course I was accustomed to giving talks and lectures, but a seminar of that kind was something different. It was smaller, more intimate, and perhaps I could speak more freely than was possible in a larger gathering.
Yeah.
And of course, I'd long been fond of that particular text. At that time, we had only 2 translations, and neither were quite complete in the sense that chapter 9 hadn't been translated. In a way, it was too difficult. The Sanskrit was very difficult. The ideas were difficult. But, of course, we do have more than one good translation now of that 9th chapter.
Yeah. There weren't very many Buddhist texts around at that time. And I'm just wondering whether you just chose the themes or subjects of the seminars just on the texts that were available, or whether you had any kind of strategy, or if you'd sort of thought about what would draw you or your students out more.
Well, I think I chose texts from which I felt I had something to say. I think it was as simple as that. Also texts which, or parts of which, might be misunderstood and which really needed explaining. I think that was the basis.
What kind of people did you have on those seminars? Do you remember them?
Order members, and we didn't have mitras then, but you might say order members and non-order members. I remember certainly on that particular seminar, I remember Deva Mitra being present. I can't remember all the others, so I think their names are there.
Yeah, yeah.
But I certainly remember Devamitra being on this particular one, on Bodhicitta Avatara.
Yeah. Do you have a sense of the kind of people that you were attracting at that time? Kind of, they seemed they seemed a lot of the time they were quite young and energetic. I'm just wondering if you had a sense of the sort of people you had around you?
First, many of them were young and sort of hippies. That was the era of, Subhuti.
The era of Subhuti. That's continued for a while, hasn't it?
And Lokamitra, yeah. And Dhammadinna and Maharishi, yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So they were, one might describe at least some of them as hippies.
Yeah.
Some were more hip than others. Subhuti had very long hair, for instance.
Well, you had quite long hair.
I had quite long hair for a while, for which there's photographic proof.
You looked quite hip.
Some people thought a bit too hip.
So were you criticised for how you looked, given that you're also wearing monk's robes at times?
Can't remember,
No.
but semi-monk's robes.
Semi-monk's robes. So for a number of people, I know a number of people, they were very affected by the seminars and the teachings that they received during those discussions. Subhuti in particular, I remember him telling me that some of his deeper understandings of the Dharma came from the study that he was doing in those seminars.
Yeah.
So I'm just remembering, if you had a sense of yourself, of moments where the Dharma really was being sparked in people or even in yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely that. Because it wasn't just that I just went on talking and explaining. There were sort of the questions coming.
Yeah.
And sometimes the question did spark off something between myself and the person asking the question.
Yeah.
That certainly did happen.
Yeah.
And of course, don't forget at that time, or maybe a little before, I had introduced the communication exercises. And the nature of communication was very much the subject of discussion within the infant order. Yeah, we took it very seriously. I took it very seriously. Talking isn't just talking. It isn't just speech. It's communication. Yeah, which is a rather different thing.
So what's happening in communication that's not just speech?
Well, in a way, it's a feeling of oneness. You're at one, as it were, with the other person. It doesn't always happen like that, but it's best. That's what it is. You really understand each other in a way that goes beyond words. That's why we used to use, following what I'd learned in Bombay, we use phrases that don't really mean anything, because you're not communicating a meaning. You're communicating yourself. Yeah?
So in the communication exercises, they're just repetitive, nonsensical.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So these seminars began to sort of spell out some of the basis of our Dharmic view in Triratna, the basis of Dharma, the view and the practice, really.
Yes, very much so.
And did you have a sense of that at the time? That you were kind of laying down foundations for us?
I don't think I did. I think I was more aware of the importance of the lectures and the fact that they were being tape recorded and therefore made available for the future.
Yeah.
I think perhaps I didn't at the very beginning realize the significance of the seminars, or realized I, in a way, created a new way of communicating the Dharma. Yeah. But history has shown that those seminars occupied a very important place in the development of the movement in the way that the Dharma is understood within the movement.
I know that Sadhaloka was describing to me when we were talking about this weekend, and he was describing to me what it was like to be in around the Buddhist movement at that time and seeing people returning home from those seminars and just how fired up they were and what they all had slightly different teachings or new things to bring into into contact with other people.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm also aware that over the last 30 years, Vidya Devi's been editing those seminars and creating books out of them.
She has indeed, and creating is the word.
Yes, yes. We've got her here today.
Ah, great.
Yeah. And she's...
Where is she?
she's over there towards the door. And we're going to get her to... She's going to do a bit of a presentation on the collected works after. Yes, when we're having our cake.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So my sense of you as a communicator of the Dharma, or as a teacher of the Dharma, was more that you were teaching the people that you had in front of you rather than having some sort of systematic plan of what you were going to teach. Is that correct?
That's correct. I think I was very much impromptu, as it were. And I let the text sort of lead me. Yeah? In a way that perhaps hadn't happened when I was just reading it by myself. Yes.
I mean, it's probably your value around communication. You're in communication with your disciples and you're in communication with those people on the seminar and you're in communication with that text. So that there's a lot of dynamic going on there, isn't there?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
And that's really the only way in which you can teach the Dharma.
Say more about that.
Well, it's not just explaining the literal meaning or the historical references. You have to try and communicate something of what you feel about that text. In addition to that, if people ask questions, well, you may be able to give a bit more, because the question may have sparked you off. In a way that you wouldn't have been sparked off without that question.
Sure. So you very much enjoyed that dynamic, it sounds.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is there a text that you have as a particular favourite?
Well, from the very beginning, I think I have to say the Sutta Nipata. Yes. And of course, I'm interested especially because there's a new translation with a substantial introduction by Bhikkhu Bodhi. And I've been going through that a bit, that is the introduction with Paramatta. And I would urge all those who are especially interested in the Pali text to acquire a copy or get their centre to acquire a copy of that book.
And what is it about the Sutta Nipata that touches you so much?
It's variety.
It's variety.
It's variety. And also, well, there's some, as it were, new perspectives. And those have come out recently as we were going through the introduction. One being, for instance, the way in which the word muni is used. This is muni more than arahants. So what does that mean? Yeah? Muni, which means, of course, the silent one. It's usually translated as the sage, or, even the silent sage. And it's a term that's shared with the Jain tradition also. The Jain ascetics are called munis, yeah? So it's the silent sage, well, that's a message in itself, in a way.
Yes.
But perhaps I better not talk too much about silence.
Well, I've just got one last question for you, and then, well, I'll just ask you if you want to say anything else. So, but I'm just going to do my last question, but I've got to quote you.
Yes.
So I'm going to quote the last paragraph in the Bodhicharyavatara seminar, as it is in print at the moment. So first of all, we get the verse from the Bodhicharyavatara, and then we get your response. And this is what I'm going to read. So the text itself says, "The self is not to be loved if the self is loved by you. If the self is to be protected, it ought not to be concerned with its protection." And then you say, "It's a paradox. If you really love yourself, don't love yourself. Selflessness or unselfishness is the best way to happiness for you, for the self. We don't usually realize this, but that's our delusion. What the whole section, indeed the whole Bodhicharyavatara, boils down to is this. With the help of urgent expostulations and rather subtle arguments, Shantideva is trying to talk us into being at least a little bit more unselfish, into considering the sorrows and sufferings of others as our own, and being sensitive to them as we are to our own. In other words, he is trying to talk to us into devoting ourselves in the Bodhisattva spirit to helping relieve the whole mass of human suffering, without going too much into whether it's your suffering or my suffering or anybody else's suffering."
Yes.
And just one more. There's a big black cloud hanging over the whole human race, and it needs to be dispelled by the united efforts of all of us.
Yes. I must say that I've sometimes almost seen that cloud of suffering, and that it's not my suffering or your suffering or our suffering or the world's suffering, it's just suffering. And it's that suffering we should try to dispel. Not just for our own sake or even for the sake of others, but just that we want to dispel that cloud of suffering. And because as some of you may remember who've been reading or looking at my recent papers, I've been a bit concerned with the subject or the question of evil, especially moral evil. And it is moral evil in individual human beings or collectively human beings that is responsible for quite a good deal of suffering in this world. And of course, the opposite of those who seek to cause suffering to others, the opposite, so to speak, is the Bodhisattva. And it's therefore the Bodhisattva ideal that occupies such an important place in our movement and in our order. So perhaps we should let Shantideva have the last word.
Well, we could. Is there anything else you want to say before we let the Bodhicharya have the last word?
Perhaps I should just do a little self-advertisement, say that I urge people, please, whether order members or others, to read these papers that I'm producing. I suspect that not everybody reads them, but I would especially urge order members and mitras who are in the ordination process to read them. I enjoy writing them, and I like to think that people who read them do enjoy reading them.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Bhante. It's been a pleasure to have you here with all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Chocolate? You like chocolate?
Yes, haha.
Thank you.
Good.
Yeah. Next to you.
Oh, now you do have a rather cold cup of tea here. I don't know if you're interested in it.
Well,
It's better than nothing.
cold tea is often the solace of the workman. No, it's not quite cold.
Good. That's good.